Welcome to Blackwater Media's 2025 year-ending special. I'm Dr. William Lester, coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. I hope that you and yours are having a wondrous and glorious holiday season. Now, sit back and enjoy this amazing expedition into the world of lurking monsters, troublesome spirits, enigmatic aliens, and all manner of the inexplicable. Africa is a land rich in beauty and history. The continent contains breathtaking landscapes and a wondrous diversity of animal and plant life. And then, of course, there are the vampires. You see, in nearly every country, every culture, and on every point of the map, you will find stories of such creatures. Africa is no different. In fact, it is argued and believed by many that the vampire itself originates in Africa. Let us now take a look at the myriad forms that the vampire takes in that place where man first walked the earth. The Obe-Ifu is a living vampire, either male or female, and was found among the Ashanti people of West Africa. The Obe-Ifu would leave its body at night to cause all kinds of terror. Its food of choice was the blood of children, but when it wasn't eating the young, it was causing slow and painful deaths. It also destroys crops by sucking out the sap and vital juices. The word Obe-Ifu comes from the Ashanti word bayi, which means sorcery. A kind of psychic vampire, the Tikoloshe or Tokoloshe, is a creature of the Xhosa people of Lesotho and the southernmost African plains. Like many supernatural beings in Africa, the Tikoloshe is a mixture of vampire and demon and has a strong association with witches and sorcerers. In many Xhosa legends, the Tikoloshe is a demon that looks like a baboon and has a connection to water. It's described as short, bulky, and has a high forehead and balding head, and it walks around during night or day swinging its long arms like a monkey. But it has many powers and can shapeshift if it chooses to. It can take human form, which would make it look almost normal or natural, since some of its monkey-like traits would show. It may also take the form of a big black bird-like creature with a skull head, so that it can fly over villages in search of its victims. The Tikoloshe is known for its ravenous sexual appetite, so most of its victims are women. This creature doesn't feed on blood, instead, the energy of a person, leaving them weak and sickly. If the Tikoloshe feeds too often on a single person, it can result in the victim's death. When it's feeding time, the Tikoloshe will approach a village woman at any time of the day in human form. It will greet her in a friendly, albeit sometimes overly friendly manner, maybe offering to help her carry something in return for sexual favors. If she were to say no, the beast would revert to its original horrific form and leap on her before she even had time to react. The Tikoloshe are very fast. Then it would proceed to rape her and feed on her life force. The Adze is a type of vampire creature who turns itself into a firefly or other insect to feed before returning to its human form. They can transform themselves into any number of common insects, which are seemingly harmless and very difficult to capture. The Adze have a taste only for the blood of the innocent. They are hunters of children, and only children, and they especially like to feed on infants. They can also feed on palm oil and coconut water, and will often raid a village's entire supply of these. But they become dangerously weak if they do not feed on the blood of children. An Adze can sustain itself without needing to kill any child. It can take enough blood to survive. However, if the Adze is deterred or thwarted from feeding for a long enough period of time, it will go on a ravenous frenzy for blood. Often, when the vampire reaches this stage of hunger, even the victims who survive become infected with a deadly disease which eventually kills them. The Otse can also have the power to possess a human and become a living vampire. When the Otse is captured, it will revert to its human form. A human sorcerer can also willingly become possessed by an Otse spirit for the abilities and powers they will gain. As an Otse host, they're able to change their form like a shapeshifter from human to something else by magic. When they are captured, however, the magic will be lost and they will revert back to their human form. This is the only way to destroy the Otse, but catching them is the trick. Unfortunately, there is no known way to protect against an Otse. Nothing will keep them out or keep a child safe from its attacks. The only measure that can be taken against them is capturing them and destroying their human form. The safest thing to do is keep your supply of coconut water and palm oil up and set a trap. The Ashanti also have stories of vampire creatures of the forest who are not controlled by any witch, but are monsters in a class of their own. These creatures live in nature, in the wild, and feed on passers-by and hunters. Two such creatures are the Asenbosum and the Sasabonsum, very similar in their habitat and feeding practices, though the Sasenbosum have wings and are very similar to bats, while the Ansenbosum are more like humans, save for their hooked legs and iron teeth. The Asenbosum live in trees of the forests and feed mainly on those who dare to wander into their domain. They wait silently in their trees to pounce on unsuspecting prey and rip out their throats with their teeth made of iron. This creature is a little unusual looking. Instead of feet, its legs are curved at the end like hooks, which they use to hang from the tree branches while they wait for prey to wander into the forests. The stories of the Sasabonsum are well known throughout Ghana and Togo. They also live in trees and will drain the blood of those who wander into their territory. These vampires, while humanoid, look very similar to bats. They are mostly human in appearance, with a human face and somewhat human body, save for their arms, which are short and stubby, and for the wings. Their wings are huge. Some legends claim the Sasabosum to have a wingspan of about 20 feet. The creatures are sometimes described as having emaciated bodies and twisted feet, and sometimes myths tell of these creatures having claws and horns as well, and some myths say that these also have iron teeth. Both of these vampires, though tree dwellers, are deadly and vicious. From the eastern Cape of Africa comes the Impundulu, a ravenous blood drinker. The creature is actually a witch's servant, or rather her familiar. It's usually owned by a female witch and is later passed on to the witch's daughter. For this reason, the female children of witches rarely marry. The Impundulu is a merciless killer. Entire families and herds of cattle were completely wiped out as the familiar sucked down the blood of each victim. But if the blood loss didn't kill them, it was the wasting disease caused by the Impundulu, or sometimes it left you with a horrible cough and the inability to have children, a condition known as ifika. But in rare cases, the victim got a quick death. This was called being slain by the bird of heaven, and it involved a sharp, unbearable pain in the chest or head. And there you have it. These are just a few examples of the vampiric horrors that exist on the continent of Africa. I could go on, I assure you, but the hour's late, and outside I can hear the sound of wind and rain, and perhaps the sound of something else lurking in the darkness. The Wendigo is a ravenous, terrifying creature of Algonquin Native American legends that devours human flesh to survive, though regardless of how much they eat, their hunger remains, which is reflected by their gaunt appearance. They are considered malevolent supernatural creatures of great spiritual power, who were strongly associated with the harsh northern winters and starvation. They are believed to roam the forests where the Algonquins once lived, and those that have disappeared over the years are rumored to have been eaten by these creatures. Many Wendigo sightings have been reported over time, not only by Native Americans, but by white settlers as well. The Wendigo is extremely fast and possesses unnatural strength, despite how frail it may appear. The older one becomes, the more powerful it becomes. As its corruption spreads throughout the forest, so does its influence over nature. Some can control woodland creatures, and others are so powerful they are said to be able to control the weather. The Wendigo stands between 10 and 14 feet tall and is gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tautly over its bones. Its complexion is ashen, with eyes pushed back deep into their sockets, resembling a skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it has are tattered and bloody, pulled back over its jagged, misshapen teeth. It is an unclean creature and gives off the odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. The word Wendigo comes from Algonquin, the common translation being the evil spirit that devours mankind. They are also known as spirits of the lonely places. According to the legend, a Wendigo is created when a human must resort to cannibalism in order to survive. In the past, this occurred when indigenous people and settlers became stranded due to the extreme winters of the northern forests of North America. In some instances, the survivors were compelled to cannibalize the dead. Other versions tell of those displaying greed, selfishness, or spiritual imbalance, whom also became a Wendigo. The Wendigo is insidious and predatory. It is extremely hostile towards humans, which it will most definitely kill given the opportunity. The Wendigo is a gluttonous creature with an insatiable appetite which drives it to perpetually kill and eat. The Wendigo will prey on those who are separated from a group or alone. It also has the ability to mimic human voices and will use this skill to lure people away from safety. Once isolated, it will tear them apart with its teeth and claws and devour them. But what of the Wendigo's vulnerabilities? What could one do as a mortal man in the face of such power and evil? The primary weakness of the Wendigo is its frozen heart. Destroying its heart will release, but also kill the human trapped within the beast. This must be done using silver bullets, a pure silver blade, or a silver stake. The shattered heart must be locked within a silver box and buried in a church graveyard or some other hallowed or sanctified ground. The Wendigo's corpse must then be dismembered with a silver blade, salted and burned to ashes, and afterwards scattered on the wind. Failing this, the beast would rise again and resume its unfathomable acts of terror and evil. One of the most shocking poltergeist cases of recent times involves a family who was disturbed and terrified by a series of horrific apparitions. The poltergeist activity took place in the late 1970s and early 1980s and became known as the Barini haunting. What began as a benign but remarkable haunting escalated into terrifying poltergeist activity, making it one of the most remarkable cases in the field of paranormal research. The real name of the family involved has been kept secret to protect their privacy. The Psychical Research Foundation investigators provided them with the pseudonym Barini. The haunting started shortly after Joe Barini moved his wife Rose and two of her children from a former marriage into his ancestral New England home in the late 1970s. The first ghost was that of a little girl whose voice was heard one evening in May of 1979. The girl's apparition spoke to his wife Rose, saying, "Mama, Mama, this is Serena." Neither Joe nor Rose knew of any girl in the family's past by the name of Serena at that time. After Serena's first visit, their daughter, Daisy, went to the doctor to have her tonsils taken out. During the operation, there were complications which resulted in her heart stopping, and she nearly died. The timing of Serena's visit and Daisy's near-death experience did not go unnoticed by the Barinis. The ghost girl's visit to the family also coincided with Joe's grandmother having a stroke and eventually passing away. Her connection to the family seems strong as Joe remembers waking up hearing Serena's voice and found his wife choking next to him in her sleep. After shaking her awake, she shared with him that her ex-husband was choking her in her dream. From Christmas 1979 to February 1981, the paranormal activity in the house had decreased. And then in March, Rose was startled by the ghost of a small boy, dressed completely in white, walking along the upstairs landing. It was almost like looking through a milk bottle, Rose later told researchers. It was a very peaceful experience. It stayed for about 2 hours on and off, coming and going. The boy's spirit appeared again a week and a half later, and this time spoke to Rose asking, "Where do all the lonely people go? Where do I belong?" The boy's ghost was witnessed by Joe. He watched the apparition enter each bedroom, then settled on the floor of the hallway in search of something. Curious, Joe later pulled up the floorboards and found a medallion of the Virgin Mary. On one occasion, when Joe saw the boy's apparition, he heard the little boy say to him, "My oldest brother is the only one who can help me." Joe didn't know what that meant, but it turned out to be the beginning of the true terror. It was shortly after this statement that objects started to move in unpredictable ways, with phones flying through the air, doors opening and slamming shut, and objects being yanked from Rose's hands. The Barinis, being understandably upset, sought the advice of a local priest who said that they should ignore the spirit if it should ever appear again. The next time the boy in white appeared to Rose, she did as she was advised and paid it no attention. Immediately, the closet door began to slam, opening and shutting repeatedly. On some occasions, unexplained footsteps were heard in the house, and a box of macaroni was yanked from Rose's hands and thrown to the floor. Joe and Rose returned to the church for help, and 2 of the priests agreed to visit the house. The priests came and they blessed the house and said Mass. Initially, there was a quiet spell after the rituals, but it didn't last long. In June 1981, a new entity descended upon the home, and this one, according to the family, was straight from hell. They described it as a sinister, hunchbacked male figure, clad in a black cape. Throughout that summer, the spirit, which the Barinis described as having large feet and a gruff voice, appeared regularly in the house. The Barinis tried to question the entity, but the only thing it told them was, "I am a minister of God." Despite this, it brought only fury and intimidation. Rose took the brunt of the figure's attacks, and on one occasion was struck by an opened freezer door. One day when Rose was praying with her rosary, the dark figure tried to distract her with various obscenities. The poltergeist activity increased in frequency and intensity. Joe, Rose, and 15-year-old John reported that they had been struck by thrown objects. The bedroom telephone continued to fly off the table. A bedside lamp fell, striking Rose on the head. Furniture in several rooms was on occasion found overturned or moved. Daisy's bedroom desk was somehow transported down the stairs. The retractable attic stairs were opened and shut repeatedly, and with such violence that it cracked the hall ceiling. Several religious objects were removed from walls or broken. During an evening meal, Rose's arm was twisted behind her back and her head pulled to one side with such force that she began to choke. On more than one occasion, Joe testified that he saw Rose pulled out of bed at night, levitated into the air, and then dropped to the floor. After one of these attacks, bruises were found on her arms and legs, as if from a powerful grip. 2 months after it first appeared, the dark, hunchbacked entity became its most violent. Not long after Joe left the house to work the night shift at his factory job, a loud banging shook the bedroom walls. The bed was rising off the floor, Rose said. I tried to scream and the door slammed so I couldn't get out of the room. The dog was growling and the door opened. Rose struggled to get to the children's bedrooms, but their doors slammed shut and she was dragged by the unseen force back into her room. Invisible hands began to choke and scratch her. She managed to phone Joe, and he rushed home and ran upstairs to the bedroom where he saw the bed jumping as high as 2 feet into the air and found Rose crouching in a corner, clutching a crucifix. Remarkably, the Barinis still refused to abandon their home. Their minds were changed, however, when one morning they awoke to find a heavy carving knife stabbed into the kitchen table. Fearing that their lives could truly be in danger, the Barinis moved out of the house for a month, putting most of their belongings into storage. Once again, they sought help from a priest who went to the house and performed an exorcism. When the Barinis returned to their home, the evil seemed to have been vanquished. They no longer saw apparitions of any kind or suffered any more poltergeist activity. Ironically, it was only after the haunting activity stopped that Joe Barini invited the investigation by the Psychical Research Foundation based in Durham, North Carolina. The organization is now the American Institute of Parapsychology based in Gainesville, Florida. The investigators were able to corroborate some of the Barini's claims through friends, neighbors, and their priest, all of whom testified that they witnessed poltergeist phenomena in the Barini home. The Ozark Howler is a mysterious creature that is said to live in the remote areas of the Ozarks, a mountainous region that covers parts of Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas. The Ozark Howler is a legend that has been passed down for generations by the locals, who have heard its eerie howls and seen its frightening appearance. The origin of the Ozark Howler legend is not clear, but some sources suggest that it may have Native American roots. According to one story, the howler was a spirit animal that protected the land from invaders. Another story claims that the howler was a curse placed on the region by a witch who was burned at the stake by European settlers. Still others believe that the howler is a manifestation of the fears and hardships that the early pioneers faced in the wilderness. The first recorded sightings of the Ozark howler date back to the 1950s, but many families have stories of their ancestors encountering the creature well before that time. The legend gained more popularity in the 1990s when a cryptozoologist named Chad Armitt published a book called Cryptozoology, Science and Speculation, which included a chapter on the Ozark Howler. Armitt claimed that he had collected dozens of eyewitness accounts and physical evidence of the creature's existence. He also speculated that the howler might be a new species of felid or canid, or a hybrid of both. In 2015, the legend received more attention when a local television station in Arkansas reported that they had received photographs of the creature from a viewer. The station contacted the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, who dismissed the photos as a hoax. However, some people still believed that the photos were genuine and that they showed proof of the howler's reality. The Ozark howler is typically described as being around the size of a bear, with a thick body, stocky legs, black shaggy hair, and prominent horns. Some witnesses also report seeing glowing red eyes, long fangs, and a long tail. The most distinctive feature of the howler is its sound, which is said to be a combination of a wolf's howl and an elk's bugle. Some people also compare it to the screams of a woman or a half-human creature. The howl is said to be very loud and terrifying and can be heard for miles. The Ozark howler is said to be nocturnal and elusive, preferring to stay in the dense forests and caves of the Ozarks. It is also said to be territorial and aggressive, especially during mating season or when protecting its young. Some stories claim that the howler can kill livestock and even humans with its powerful jaws and claws. Others say that it can cause bad luck or misfortune to those who see it or hear it. There have been many reported sightings of the Ozark howler over the years, mostly from hunters, hikers, campers, and residents who live near the woods. As one might expect, some of these sightings are simply more credible than others, but they all share some common elements. Here are some examples of notable sightings. In October 2014, a motorist in Benton County, Arkansas, reported that he nearly collided with an unidentified animal on Pump Station Road in Springdale. He described it as a bear-sized, gray, fast-running animal with horns. In December of 2015, a viewer sent photos to 4029 News in Arkansas, claiming that they showed images of the Ozark howler near Devil's Den State Park. The photos showed a dark animal with horns and red eyes hiding behind some trees. In June 2016, a group of friends camping near Lake Tenkiller in Oklahoma claimed that they heard loud howls and saw glowing eyes in the dark. They also found large paw prints and scratch marks on their car. In August 2017, a couple hiking near Branson in Missouri said that they saw a large black animal with horns crossing a road. They said it looked like a cross between a bear and a goat. In October 2018, a hunter in Texas reported that he shot and killed an animal that he believed was an Ozark howler near Big Thicket National Preserve. He said that it had black fur, horns, fangs, and red eyes. He took photos of his trophy and sent them to a local newspaper. Of course, there are many theories and opinions about what the Ozark howler really is, or if it even exists at all. Some people believe that it's a real animal that is yet to be identified by science. Others think that it's a hoax or a misidentification of known animals. Here's some other possible explanations for the Ozark howler. Perhaps it is a new species or subspecies of Felid or Canid. Some cryptozoologists suggest that the Ozark howler might be related to big cats like cougars or lynxes, or to wolves or coyotes. They argue that these animals could have adapted to their environment and developed horns or other features over time. Maybe it's a hybrid animal. Some people propose that the Ozark howler might be a result of crossbreeding between different animals like bears and goats or dogs and cats. They point out that hybrids can sometimes inherit traits from both parents and exhibit unusual characteristics. Alternatively, it could possibly be a known animal with mutations or deformities. Some skeptics claim that the Ozark howler might be nothing more than an ordinary animal with genetic defects or injuries that make it look different from normal specimens. They cite examples of animals with horns or antlers growing on their heads or bodies due to tumors or infections. And of course, there are those who chalk all of this up to pranks and hoaxes. Whatever the real answer is, one would have to agree that the Ozark howler represents a genuine mystery and a perfect subject for cryptozoological inquiry. And if you live in that region, and you should happen to hear a frightening, howling scream ripping through the night air, stay indoors. After all, better safe than sorry.
Join the happiest party in town at our bell-ringing New Year's Eve show. Father Time will get the heave-ho, and we'll usher in the new year 1953 with the happiest whoop-it-up welcome you've ever seen. You'll see a great, joyous screen show. You'll laugh, you'll scream, you'll roar with delight. It's going to be a riot of fun. So spend your New Year's Eve with us.
I'd like to share with you a bizarre series of events. Events involving what I like to call amphibious anomalies that have shocked and terrified businessmen, farmers, and police officers, and remains one of the most intriguing cryptozoological mysteries in the United States. I refer to the intriguing case of the Loveland Frogmen. The story of these unique creatures begins in May of 1955 on a lonely stretch of road that runs along the Little Miami River in Clermont County, Ohio, just on the outskirts of a small town known as Loveland. At approximately 3:30 a.m., an unnamed businessman claimed to have witnessed three bipedal, quasi-reptilian entities congregating by the side of the road. The man pulled his car to the curb and observed these creatures for what he estimated to be about 3 minutes. During this time, he noticed that these strange beings stood between 3 and 4 feet tall, were covered with leathery skin, and had webbed hands and feet. Their most distinguishing characteristic, however, was their distinctly frog-like heads, which the man claimed bore deep wrinkles where hair should have been. Just as the man was about to steal away, one of the creatures suddenly held what the witness could only describe as a wand above his head. The anonymous source further claimed that sparks spewed out of the end of this device. Needless to say, he left post-haste. Thus begins the bizarre legend of the Loveland Frogmen. Now, this tale would be fascinating enough if it ended there, but the two most significant encounters in the case, and indeed two of the most significant encounters in the annals of cryptozoology, were yet to come. At about 1 a.m. on March 3, 1972, nearly 17 years after the first report, a police officer who understandably chose to remain anonymous was traveling along Riverside Road heading towards Loveland when he saw something that would forever change his life. The officer claimed that he was driving slowly due to the substantial amount of ice on the road when he saw what looked like a dog by the curb. Suddenly, the animal darted in front of the cruiser, forcing the officer to slam on the brakes in order to avoid a potential collision with the creature. Once the police cruiser came to a halt, its headlights fell upon the prone animal. At this point, the officer described something that seems literally too bizarre to be true. In the span of seconds, this crouched, frog-like creature stood on 2 legs, stared back at the policeman, then scrambled over the guardrail and scurried down the embankment, finally disappearing into the Little Miami River. The officer in question described the creature as being 3 to 4 feet tall and weighing approximately 50 to 75 pounds. He also claimed that its skin had a leathery texture and that the animal's features resembled those of a frog or lizard. Another officer investigated the scene later that evening. He saw no sign of the creature, but reported that there were distinct scratch marks on the guardrail where the animal purportedly crossed. The next sighting occurred 2 weeks later when police officer Mark Matthews had an encounter of his own. According to Matthews' report, he was driving into Loveland and he spotted what he believed to be an injured animal lying on the pavement. Matthews climbed out of his cruiser with the intention of removing the carcass from the already ice-slicked road when the creature abruptly lurched upwards into a crouched position. Taken aback by the frogman's appearance and actions, Matthews unholstered his revolver and took a shot at the creature, which then proceeded to hobble over the side of the road and step over the guardrail, all while keeping a watchful eye on the officer. Matthews' frogman matched the first officer's description down to the last detail, with the exception of a tail, which was absent in earlier reports. In the years which have followed these events, Officer Matthews has reneged somewhat on this tale. He now claims that the animal in question was nothing more than a large reptile, which likely escaped from its owner. He further insists that the only reason he shot at the creature was to help confirm a fellow officer's story, a story which was, of course, being met with predictable skepticism by their superiors. Whether or not Matthew's change of heart was inspired by ridicule or the fading memory of an event from which he was 30 years removed, the fact remains that his own testimony contradicts his later retraction. Later that same year, an anonymous farmer reported sighting 4 bizarre creatures while inspecting his fields, which were located adjacent to the Little Miami River. The farmer claimed that the eyes of the frogmen were large and circular. Their skin was a pale greenish gray, and perhaps most disturbingly, that their mouths were wide and filled with sharp teeth. Thankfully, instead of attacking the poor man, the creatures stayed true to form and made their escape back into the river, from where they have yet to be seen again. Arguably, the most intriguing aspect of this case is the apparent use of a technological device, the sparkling wand, in the earliest reported encounter with these creatures. It has led some investigators to suggest that these creatures may not just be anomalous animals, but intelligent beings, possibly from out of this world. It's not entirely uncommon for soldiers returning from war to come home with reports of seeing a monster. Throughout history, there have been countless wartime monster sightings. But one sighting in particular, or more accurately, multiple sightings of the same creature, seems to have been more documented than most. I refer specifically to the rock apes of Vietnam. Rock ape is the name given to creatures allegedly spotted by multiple American soldiers during the Vietnam War. However, even prior to the war, stories floated around of jungle people. These jungle people were bipedal and ape-like, standing about 6 feet tall. They were stoutly built and very muscular, but had protruding stomachs. Like many unknown ape-like creatures, they were also covered in hair, either brown or black, with the exception of their knees, the soles of their feet and hands, and their faces, which were all hairless. The jungle people tended to live in more isolated, remote areas of the jungle, keeping to themselves. However, if a human made the unfortunate mistake of crossing their path, they would become bold and aggressive, and would not have any hesitation in attacking the unlucky intruder. The jungle people were at their most active at dusk or during the night, and if they traveled, they would do so in packs. This fact would explain some aspects of the sightings later reported by American soldiers. The most prominent accounts of rock apes were published in Craig P.J. Jorgensen's book, Very Crazy GI, Strange but True Stories of the Vietnam War. One such story from this book tells the account of a unit of 6 men from the 101st Airborne Division. This particular unit was taking a rest when the trees about 15 yards uphill from them suddenly began to shake violently. Naturally, given their environment, the soldiers assumed the shaking was caused by the enemy and that they needed to immediately prepare to be under attack. However, as the soldiers watched the trees, they saw that an oblong head with a face covered in reddish hair, possessing a huge mouth and dark, deep-set eyes, had emerged from the brush. This account was also documented in an article by Brent Swanser, The Mysterious Rock Apes of the Vietnam War. When this bizarre creature fully emerged, the soldiers were able to get a better look, and they saw that it was about 5 feet tall and very muscular, and covered in matted reddish hair. The creature stood on 2 legs and examined the soldiers just as they examined it. As the soldiers argued over whether or not the creature might be an orangutan, it retreated back into the jungle. Another incident occurred in 1966 in a location known as Hill 868 in Khe Nam Province, the home of several rock ape sightings throughout the war. In this account, a Marine unit was reporting to their captain that they had spotted movement in the brush, which they assumed was being caused by Viet Cong. The captain told his unit over the radio not to fire. Not long after, the unit reported back that rather than Viet Cong, they were being surrounded by hairy bipedal humanoid creatures. The captain told the unit that rather than firing on the creatures, they should instead throw rocks. However, this backfired as the creatures began throwing the rocks back at them. At this point, the Marines guessed there were hundreds of these creatures, far too overwhelming an amount to stick with their current plan. The Marines were told to change tactics and use their bayonets to fight the creatures. Soon after the order was given, the captain heard over the radio what sounded to him like an epic battle. Afterward, men were sent out to investigate. The location was covered with injured, but not dead, Marines, as might be expected, but also allegedly the bodies of several rock apes. This became known as the Battle of Dong Din, though the only evidence of the event in the dead rock ape bodies littering the battlefield seemed to be the eyewitness accounts, as with most alleged cryptid sightings. Yet another account comes from an unnamed GI. This man gives a description of the rock ape he encountered, which, like the other accounts, was recorded in Jorgensen's book. The GI described it as having an oblong head framed with a hair-covered face. Dark, deep-set eyes lay beneath a prominent brow, and they did nothing to complement the heavy jowls and angry mouth. In 1974, Professor Vo Quai of the Vietnam National University led a North Vietnamese scientific expedition. The expedition found prints that were described as wider than a human print, but too large to be that of an ape. What makes the recorded sightings of rock apes unique is that these accounts are generally published in books about the Vietnam conflict that feature veterans recounting their experiences, and not in books that focus on cryptozoology. Perhaps this is why most rock ape theories consider natural explanations rather than cryptozoological ones. The most common theory is that the soldiers actually saw Tonkin snub-nosed monkeys. However, these monkeys do not come near the fitting descriptions given by the witnesses. Other suggestions for misidentified animals are gibbons or giant orangutans. Of course, given the mysteriousness of the creatures sighted, more unusual explanations have been given. Some have suggested that rock apes could be a surviving population of hominids, or early ancestors of humans, or even a surviving population of Gigantopithecus. Others have suggested that they are an undiscovered species of primate. And finally, given the place and time in which the sightings happened, it's probably not surprising that some have speculated the soldiers who experienced the encounters might have been under the influence of LSD. Frankly, I find this the least credible explanation of all. So, what are the rock apes of Vietnam? We'll probably never know for sure. For now, much like with Bigfoot and other bipedal ape-like cryptids, all we really have to go on is the accounts of the returning soldiers and a handful of footprint casts. In the heart of Utah's rugged terrain lies Emery County, a region steeped in history and folklore. Among its many tales, one stands out: the legend of the demon of Emery County. This enigmatic entity has both intrigued and unsettled locals and visitors alike, weaving a narrative that blurs the lines between reality and the supernatural. Emery County, established in 1880 and named after Territorial Governor George W. Emery, is characterized by its vast landscapes, including the San Rafael Swell and numerous ghost towns that whisper stories of the past. The legend of the demon of Emery County is not as widely documented as other regional myths, such as the Bear Lake Monster or tales of skinwalkers. However, local lore speaks of a malevolent presence that has haunted the area for generations. Descriptions of the demon vary, but common threads include a shadowy figure with piercing eyes that instills an overwhelming sense of dread in those who encounter it. Some accounts suggest it is a restless spirit from the county's early settler days, while others believe it to be a manifestation of the hardships and tragedies that befell the region's inhabitants. Emery County's history is marked by the rise and fall of mining towns, with several now standing as ghost towns, silent monuments to a bygone era. These abandoned settlements, such as Moreland and Victor, contribute to the eerie atmosphere that pervades the area. It's within these desolate locales that sightings of the demon are most frequently reported. Witnesses often recount unexplained phenomena, disembodied whispers, sudden drops in temperature, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Skeptics might attribute these experiences to the natural sounds and sensations of deserted places. But for those who have felt the demon's presence, the fear is undeniably real. The landscape of Emery County itself seems to play a role in the legend. The San Rafael Swell, with its labyrinthine canyons and rugged terrain, has long been a place of mystery. Native American tribes, such as the Fremont people, left behind petroglyphs and pictographs in areas like Buckhorn Wash and Temple Mountain Wash, hinting at a deep spiritual connection to the land. Some speculate that the demon could be linked to these ancient cultures, perhaps as a guardian spirit or a manifestation of past rituals. While concrete evidence of the demon's existence remains elusive, the legend persists, passed down through generations as a cautionary tale or a topic of hushed conversation around campfires. Whether a product of overactive imaginations, a psychological response to the isolation of the area, or something more sinister, the demon of Emery County continues to captivate those who hear its story. For paranormal enthusiasts and investigators, Emery County offers a compelling destination. The combination of historical intrigue, abandoned settlements, and the pervasive legend of the demon creates an environment ripe for exploration. However, it's essential to approach such investigations with respect for the local communities and the histories they cherish. In the end, the demon of Emery County serves as a reminder of the power of folklore and the human tendency to seek explanations for the unknown. Whether the demon is a literal entity or a symbolic representation of the region's tumultuous past, its legend adds a rich layer to the tapestry of Emery County's cultural heritage. As with all tales of the supernatural, the truth may lie somewhere between the shadows and the light, waiting for those brave enough to seek it out.
The best New Year's and New Year's parties begin at Safeway, where Safeway meats, cheese, produce, dairy products, and seasonings combine with your ingenuity to create a buffet worth celebrating. The company's here, and so is Safeway, with Craigmont mixes, Party Pride nuts, potato chips, pretzels, and all the ingredients for the happiest of New Year parties. Happy New Year, everyone, from all of your friends at Safeway.
Since we're neighbors, let's be friends. Safeway.
In the heart of North Carolina's high country lies the tranquil town of Valle Crucis, a name derived from the Latin Valley of the Cross, referencing the convergence of two streams that intersect at right angles in the valley center. This picturesque setting, with its mist-laden mornings and serene landscapes, harbors a chilling legend that has persisted through generations. The tale of the demon dog of Valle Crucis. The legend centers around St. John's Episcopal Church, an old stone edifice constructed in the 1860s, situated along Highway 194 on the town's outskirts. The church's adjoining cemetery, with its time-worn gravestones, serves as a purported haunt of this spectral canine. One of the most frequently recounted stories involves two young men, students from a nearby college, who were driving through Valle Crucis late one clear moonlit autumn night. As they approached the vicinity of St. John's Episcopal Church, A massive, shadowy figure leapt from behind a tombstone into the path of their vehicle. Startled, the driver swerved and brought the car to a halt on the roadside. Peering into the darkness, they discerned an enormous dog as large as a full-grown man with bristling black fur and menacing yellow teeth. Most unnerving were its eyes, glowing with an eerie red light, not merely reflecting but emitting a sinister glow. As the beast began advancing toward them, fear seized the young men. The driver accelerated, navigating the winding mountain road at increasing speeds, 60, 70, and even 80 miles per hour. To their horror, the demon dog maintained the chase and almost with no effort matched their pace and even drew nearer. It was only upon crossing a particular bridge located just below the confluence of the streams forming a cross that the pursuit ceased. The spectral hound vanished as abruptly as it appeared, leaving the men shaken and bewildered. They continued to boon, seeking refuge in a local diner, the only establishment open at that late hour, where they attempted to make sense of their harrowing encounter. This account is among several that contribute to the enduring legend of the demon dog of Valle Crucis. Other reports include sightings of a woman's apparition wandering the same cemetery, as well as unexplained sounds of gunshots and a weeping female, none of which have been conclusively linked to any known events. The tale of the demon dog shares similarities with various global legends of hellhounds, supernatural canines often associated with death or the underworld. In European folklore, such creatures are frequently depicted as guardians of the supernatural realm, their appearances considered omens of death. In the context of Valle Crucis, the demon dog has become an integral part of local folklore, embodying the region's rich tradition of storytelling. Whether regarded as a cautionary tale, a manifestation of collective fears, or a genuine supernatural phenomenon, the legend persists, captivating the imaginations of residents and visitors alike. For those intrigued by the paranormal, Valle Crucis offers a compelling destination. The serene beauty of the landscape juxtaposed with its eerie legends provides a unique experience, a reminder that even the most tranquil places may harbor secrets lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary. As with all folklore, the legend of the demon dog of Valle Crucis serves to enrich the cultural tapestry of the region, offering insight into the fears, beliefs, and storytelling traditions of its people. Whether one views the tale with skepticism or wonder, it undeniably adds a layer of mystique to the already enchanting landscape of North Carolina's high country. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. In September 1954, the children of Glasgow's Gorbals district embarked on a remarkable quest that has since become a legendary chapter in the city's folklore. They were hunting a creature that had ignited their imaginations and stoked their fears: the Gorbals vampire. The Gorbals, situated on the south bank of the River Clyde, was a densely populated area known for its industrial backdrop and tight-knit community. Amid the post-war austerity, children often played in the streets, and notably in the southern necropolis, a vast cemetery that, despite its somber purpose, served as an unconventional playground. The legend of the Gorbals vampire began innocuously as playground whispers among the children. They spoke of a towering figure, 7 feet tall, with iron teeth that gleamed menacingly. Rumors swirled that this fearsome entity had abducted and devoured 2 local boys, though no such disappearances were officially recorded. The adults dismissed these tales as mere flights of fancy, but the children were resolute. They decided to confront the menace themselves. On the evening of September 23, 1954, hundreds of children, some as young as 4, armed themselves with makeshift weapons, sticks, knives, and even dogs, and descended upon the southern necropolis. The cemetery with its Gothic tombstones and mausoleums was shrouded in an eerie atmosphere, further intensified by the adjacent steelworks. The industrial facility emitted flames and smoke, casting flickering shadows that danced among the gravestones. One of the participants, Tam Smith, later recalled the scene. The red light and the smoke would flare up and make all the gravestones leap. You could see figures walking about at the back, all lined in red light. The combination of industrial emissions and the children's heightened imaginations created a surreal and terrifying environment. The police were eventually summoned to disperse the gathering, but the children's determination was not easily quelled. They returned for the next 2 nights, steadfast in their mission to vanquish the vampire. It was only after persistent efforts from parents, teachers, and local authorities that the fervor began to subside. In the aftermath, the incident attracted significant media attention and sparked a moral panic. Many adults pointed fingers at American horror comics, which were gaining popularity among British youth. These publications, with titles like Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror, were accused of corrupting young minds with graphic depictions of monsters and mayhem. The Gorbals vampire episode became a catalyst for legislative action, leading to the Children and Young Persons Harmful Publications Act of 1955, which sought to restrict the availability of such material to minors. However, the origins of the vampire legend may also be rooted in local folklore and the socioeconomic conditions of the time. The Gorbals was an area marked by poverty and industrial pollution. The steelworks not only dominated the skyline but also influenced the daily lives of its residents. Some suggest that the image of a creature with iron teeth was a manifestation of the community's collective anxieties, perhaps influenced by tales like Jenny with the Iron Teeth, a Scottish nursery rhyme used to encourage children to go to bed. Today, the story of the Gorbals vampire serves as a fascinating example of mass hysteria and the power of urban legends. It highlights how folklore can emerge from a blend of cultural influences, environmental factors, and the vivid imaginations of children. The Southern Necropolis remains a historic site in Glasgow, and the tale of the vampire continues to intrigue both locals and visitors, reminding us of the enduring nature of myths and the human penchant for storytelling. In recent years, the legend has been commemorated through various artistic endeavors, including a mural near the Citizens Theatre in the Gorbals, ensuring that the tale of the Gorbals vampire remains a vibrant part of Glasgow's cultural heritage. As a paranormal investigator, the Gorbals vampire case underscores the importance of understanding the cultural and psychological contexts that give rise to such phenomena. It serves as a reminder that the most compelling mysteries often lie at the intersection of history, community, and the human imagination. There have long been tales of lost civilizations and strange peoples that have faded into the sands of time. Such enigmatic races lurk in the tales and history of nearly every major culture, and they span the range of the supernatural to pure myth to the possibly real. One tale of a mysterious lost race comes to us from the Appalachian Mountains of the United States, and it tells of a strange race of albino, sun-fearing beings who supposedly roamed this land long before even the natives arrived. In the untamed wilderness along the southern Appalachian Mountains of the United States, the native Cherokee people have long told of a strange race of beings they called the Moon-Eyed People. This mysterious tribe was supposedly smaller than average humans, almost dwarfish in nature, very pale skin like pure white alabaster, with shocking white hair, generous beards and body hair, and inhumanly blue eyes, sensitive to light to the point that they were said to be unable to see in the daytime, hence their name. These moon-eyed people were purportedly completely nocturnal, hiding in the dark caves and underground caverns during the day, only to come out at night when the sun had retreated. And indeed, sunlight was said to be enough to kill them if they ever got caught out in the open during daylight hours. These strange, diminutive nocturnal denizens of the land were said to have been here long before the first native peoples had settled the area, and according to most legends, they were eventually expelled by local natives, although what form this expulsion takes varies from tradition to tradition. In some tales, it was the Creek people from the south who cast them out, or in others, it is the Cherokees themselves who waged a relentless campaign and full-out war against these pale-skinned creatures to drive them to other lands. The American botanist, naturalist, and physician Benjamin Smith Barton wrote of these people and their downfall back in 1797 in his book, New Views of the Origin of the Tribes and Nations of America. He said, "The Cherokee tell us that when they first arrived in the country which they inhabit, they found it possessed by certain moon-eyed people who could not see in the daytime. These wretches they expelled." Whatever happened to this enigmatic race, their legacy has supposedly remained behind in the ancient rock structures and mysterious pre-Columbian mounds and ruins that dot the landscape along the Appalachians from North Carolina all the way down through Georgia and Alabama, all said to have been created by the moon-eyed people. Perhaps the most famous of these is an 850-foot-long stone wall dated to 400 to 500 CE, which meanders through Fort Mountain State Park just over the North Carolina border in Georgia, and is said to be a vestige of the bloody war between the mysterious moon-eyed people and the native Cherokee. There are countless other crude rock structures, walls, mounds, and forts scattered all along the Appalachians, as well as anomalous carvings, figurines, and a soapstone carving of conjoined figures now on display at the Cherokee County Historical Museum, said to be of these strange people. And no one really knows who made any of them except for the Cherokee themselves, who say it was the work of the moon-eyed people. Whoever built such structures has long remained a mystery, and when Europeans first came to the region, the natives, who were not known for making such fort-like structures themselves, claimed that they had always been there, saying that they were constructions of the moon-eyed people. Interestingly, while Cherokee folklore has many tales of supernatural beings and various spirits, the moon-eyed people are never spoken of in such a manner, rather being described matter-of-factly as physically another race inhabiting the same lands. Of course, with such an oddity as a cryptic tribe of bizarre dwarf subterranean albino people, almost like vampires in their intolerance for sunlight, and who predated the native people and constructed their mysterious mounds and forts, there is bound to be theorizing as to who or what they may have been. One of the most popular ideas is that they are evidence of native contact with European explorers who had made it to the New World long before history says they did, possibly connected to the legend of the Welsh-speaking Indians. The story of white-skinned, Welsh-speaking Indians in the New World originates with a 16th century manuscript published by Welsh antiquarian Humphrey Llwyd, in which he writes of Welsh settlers coming to these shores in the 12th century, in particular a Prince Madoc, who along with his followers was said to have immigrated to America from Wales in about 1170, landing somewhere in the vicinity of Mobile Bay, Alabama. Madoc would supposedly end up shipping over hundreds of his followers to the New World, where they would disappear into the wilderness, never to return. In the following centuries, there were many stories of fair-skinned, blue-eyed natives who spoke a form of Welsh from the area, and these have been speculated to have been the descendants of these settlers. Indeed, there are many tales of blue-eyed Indians from the so-called New World, and perhaps this all has some part to play in the mystery of the moon-eyed people. Another idea put forth by Benjamin Smith Barton is that they were out-of-place descendants of members of the Guna people of Panama, who have such an uncommonly high rate of albinoism that they were once referred to as the White Indians, and who were reportedly able to see better at night. Another theory is that, rather than go to war, the natives of the land actually integrated with the moon-eyed people and absorbed them. Still, other more far-out theories are that these were some other species of human, a new race, or even ancient astronauts from another world. It is still unclear who or what the moon-eyed people were or may have been, and they remain a distinctly enigmatic lost civilization, if they ever existed at all. Who were these albino, sun-fearing people? Were they some lost race, descendants of pre-Columbian explorers, or even a new species, or alien interlopers? Or were these just a figment of folklore and myth? The answers to such questions remain obscure, but the tales of the moon-eyed people have persisted for over 1,000 years, and the idea that such a race of lost humanoids has been lost to history, and it captures the imagination. On a stormy night in February 1919, young Jock Forbes and his father were returning in their pony cart from Inverness. Nearing the hamlet of Inverferrigeg, their pony suddenly started and backed away. Jock and his father peered ahead. There was something crossing the road, coming out of the forest and ambling towards the loch. As they tried to calm the pony, they were aware that whatever was in the road before them was a very big animal. As it splashed into the water and Jock's father murmured to himself in Gaelic, they spurred the pony forward and rushed home. Jock later recalled that they never spoke of the incident again. The Loch Ness Monster is well known to be a water-dwelling creature, but few realize that over the years it's made several forays into the land. The first recorded land sighting occurred in 1879, when a group of children spotted it by the Aldora Cemetery, waddling down the hillside towards the loch. And in the following years, a trickle of land-based incidents continued to be reported. The fact that Nessie occasionally appeared on land was not fully known about by the wider public until 1933. That year, on the 22nd of July, it was spotted by Mr. and Mrs. George Spicer, a London couple returning from a Scottish holiday. They were traveling along the Doors to Foyers Road when 200 yards in front of them, they noticed an unusual gray object crossing the road. First, they saw what appeared to be a trunk-like object, which was then followed by a large body. Mr. Spicer later claimed that it looked like a scenic railway. The couple realized that whatever it was a living creature, and watched in fascinated horror as it jerked across the road and vanished into the water. The vegetation the creature had passed through was flattened. Locals later stated that large patches of crushed bracken and weeds were commonly associated with the monster. The Spicer sighting was met with both fascination and ridicule. It was one thing to have the monster appear in the water, but quite another for it to be crossing the road. The Spicers were vindicated when a similar creature in similar circumstances was spotted the following January by Arthur Grant, a veterinary student. Grant was returning from Inverness on his motorbike around 1 a.m. when he almost collided with a dark object coming across the road. In the bright moonlight, Grant was able to notice the animal's small head, long neck, large body, flippers, and tail. Frightened by the motorbike, it quickly fled back into the lock. Grant was amazed. It was unlike any animal he had ever seen. Later that year, Margaret Monroe again spotted the animal out of the water. A housemaid at Kilchamine Lodge, she watched it through binoculars as it rolled about on the shingled beach of Borlam Bay. Like the other, she described it as being gray and having a long neck, small head, large body, flippers, and humps. It was quite happy sunning itself on the shore, and after a period of around 25 minutes, it slipped back into the water. Later that day, her employers walked down to the beach and noticed that the shingle was indented, as if something of considerable size had been lying there. In the early 1960s, monster hunter Torkel McLeod spotted the animal half submerged in water lying by Horseshoe Scree, a shingled patch of hillside. Its head, neck, and front flippers were visible out of the water, and it turned its long neck from side to side. As in most land-based sightings, the creature eventually slid back into the water and swam away. In 1962, the monster was by one of its favorite haunts, Urquhart Castle. Arthur Kopit and a friend heard it eating on a beach below the castle. He described how it was gasping and munching, but when they drew closer to the spot, it quickly took off for the safety of the water. Generally, land sightings of the monster are consistent with the majority of plesiosaur-like ones from the water. Occasionally, witnesses have described creatures more akin to a camel than a prehistoric marine reptile. Still others have described the animal with hippopotamus-like features. The most recent land sighting occurred in 2009 when Ian Moncton and Tracy Gordon heard a rustling noise near where they'd parked their car on a lay-by. The rustling was followed by a loud splash that they likened to a car rolling into the water. Ian went out to investigate and took a series of photographs, one of which appeared to show something unusual in the loch. From a folkloric perspective, the concept of Nessie on land is not so peculiar. In the myths told about the Kelpie, or water horse, found throughout Scotland, a Kelpie is a creature that primarily lives in bodies of water, often luring its victims to their watery graves by first presenting itself on land as a beautiful horse. Luckily, sightings of the Loch Ness Monster as we know it have never resulted in disaster. So on your next trip to Loch Ness and the Scottish Highlands, be sure to keep an eye out for anything unusual ambling down the road. In 1963, 4 British teens saw a UFO land in a nearby forest, but what would haunt them for the rest of their lives was the bizarre bat-like beast that apparently came out of it. On the chilly autumn evening of November 16, 1963, 17-year-old John Flaxton, 18-year-old Mervyn Hutchinson, and 2 other friends were walking home from a party on Sandling Road in the county of Kent, a region apparently rife with cryptozoological and paranormal activity, when they saw a silent, glowing orb-like object descend from the heavens. The unusual self-illuminated ovoid object, which was described as being just a few meters in diameter, hovered above a field. It eventually made its way behind the trees and settled into the shadow-infested foliage of the woods at Sandling Park. While the teenagers were still reeling from their astonishing sighting, something even more inconceivable would soon grab their attention. Moments after the extraordinary craft apparently landed behind the trees, the teens noticed a shaking in the brush, and what emerged was one of the most unique creatures ever to be chronicled in ufology. Later, the 4 horrified eyewitnesses would explain that an erratic, shambling, quasi-humanoid figure emerged from the woods and waddled towards them. The beast apparently looked like a headless bat, and it was approximately 5 feet tall, with large webbed feet and wings protruding from its back. In Hutchinson's own words, it didn't seem to have any head. There were huge wings on its back, like a bat. The group of friends, understandably overwhelmed with terror and adrenaline, sprinted away from the freakish bat thing and made their way to the nearest police station. Once there, they related their tale to what one must assume were highly skeptical officers. Flaxton would later state that he felt cold all over during the episode. Less than a week later, on the 21st of November, a young man named Keith Croucher seemed to confirm the teen's claim of an unusual object soaring over Kent, when he announced that he too had seen an oddly shaped craft hovering over the local soccer field, not far from where Flaxton and his crew had claimed to have had their curious encounter with a UFO and its bizarre occupant. On November 23rd, John McGoldrick decided that the reports coming from Sandling Park were simply too outrageous to be ignored. So after soliciting the help of an unnamed, yet clearly intrepid friend, McGoldrick and his cohort made their way to the site of all the unusual goings-on, hoping to perchance have a face-to-face encounter with the strange alien creature. Once inside the wooded area, McGoldrick claimed that he and his companion discovered no less than 3 footprints, each 24 inches long and 9 inches across. He also stated that they had stumbled across an area where the broken foliage had been flattened, as if by some tremendous weight. McGoldrick's claims caught the ear of the local press, who were no doubt eager to feed the public's ever-growing appetite for new information regarding this strange phenomenon. To that end, the newsmen accompanied McGoldrick back to the scene of the weirdness on December 11th. While the reporters did not manage to turn up any new evidence, it was stated that the thickets were still bathed in an eerie glow, which continued for some days before subsiding. The case was reported in scads of newspapers, as well as a 1971 issue of Flying Saucer Review under the title The Saltwood Mystery, due to its proximity to the area. In the 1970s, ufologist Chris Wolf also reopened the case of this almost avian anomaly. According to records, he interviewed Flaxton and also inspected the scene of the unearthly encounter. Following his investigation, Wolf came to the dubious conclusion that what Flaxton, Hutchinson, and their friends actually saw was an ordinary crow, somehow oddly illuminated by the flashing of an electric train passing not far away in the chilled autumn air. He apparently did not attempt to explain, however, how the crow managed to appear to be nearly 5 feet in height, web-footed, or headless. Other skeptics have more absurdly suggested that the witnesses saw nothing more than a scarecrow. Thus ends the apparent saga of the Bat Beast of Kent. But it has been pointed out by numerous investigators that, as unusual as this creature's description was, it bears an uncanny resemblance to its British crypto cousin and Cornwall's most famous monster, the Owl Man. The headless bat-like description also begs comparison to a bizarre yet eerily common breed of cryptid that includes West Virginia's Mothman, Germany's Freiburg Schrecker, China's Man-Dragon, and the former Soviet Union's Blackbird of Chernobyl, just to name a few. Most of the aforementioned creatures are considered by many Fortean researchers to be paranormal entities, essentially oracles of doom. But what makes the Kent case so intriguing is that it marks the first reported association between these bizarre beings and the UFO phenomenon. While admittedly, none of the eyewitnesses saw the thing actually exit the UFO, one would be hard-pressed to deny at least some tenuous connection between the unusual aircraft seen landing in the woods at Sandling Park and the monster that soon thereafter emerged from the thicket, and ever after into the lore of both ufology and cryptozoology. The story of vampires begins not in the dark corners of Transylvania, but in the frightened whispers of real people from real villages hundreds of years ago. It's easy to dismiss vampires as mere fiction, the stuff of Gothic novels and Hollywood films. But as a paranormal investigator, I've learned that legends rarely appear from thin air. They're born from fear, misunderstanding, and sometimes unexplained truth. The word vampire first appeared in old Russian texts around 1047 CE, described as upir, possibly meaning the thing at the sacrifice. But it wasn't until the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly in Eastern Europe, that the modern image of the vampire took shape. Far from the characteristic caped aristocrat of modern movies, these vampires were grotesque revenants, bloated with blood, returning from the grave to torment family members and neighbors. One of the earliest recorded cases was that of Jure Grando from what is now Croatia in 1672. Grando died in 1656, but according to villagers, he returned at night, knocking on doors, and even assaulting his widow. The fear escalated so much that local authorities exhumed his corpse, drove a stake through his heart, and eventually beheaded him to end his reign of terror. In the same century, in the Serbian village of Kiseljevo, another infamous case unfolded. When Peter Blagojevic died in 1725, villagers claimed he came back, demanding food from his son, who mysteriously died soon after. Several other deaths followed, and when Blagojevic's body was exhumed, it showed no signs of decomposition, with blood at his mouth. His corpse was staked and burned. These are not campfire tales. They are written in official records, signed by local magistrates and military officers. Something about these events terrified entire communities to the point of digging up graves and mutilating bodies. Of course, modern science explains much of it. Diseases like tuberculosis, known back then as consumption, devastated entire families. In 1892 in Rhode Island, the Brown family lost several members to tuberculosis. When Mercy Brown died, the local community, desperate and superstitious, exhumed her body. Finding it unusually well preserved with blood in her heart, they declared her a vampire. Her heart and liver were burned, and the ashes were mixed into a potion given to her ill brother in a tragic attempt to cure him. Beyond disease, early people had no knowledge of how bodies naturally decompose. Corpses buried in winter soil often showed little decay. Sometimes blood would leak from the mouth or nose, and fingernails might appear to have grown as the skin shrank. To terrified villagers, these were signs that the dead were still alive, preying on the living. But it wasn't just peasant superstition. Archaeologists have discovered numerous vampire graves across Europe. In Poland, a 17th century woman's skeleton was found buried with a sickle pressed against her neck and a padlock on her toe, a clear attempt to stop her from rising. In another grave in Pagzuejo, a man was buried with a sickle across his throat inside a church, suggesting even the supposedly faithful feared the undead walking again. The vampire we know today, the elegant, alluring Dracula, is a far cry from these grotesque revenants. It was only in the 19th century, through writers like Bram Stoker, that the vampire myth was refined into something seductive and literary. Hollywood, of course, took it even further. And yet, the deeper I look into vampire folklore, the more I realize how much of it was based on real human fear. Fear of death, disease, the unknown. Vampires represent something we all dread. The idea that the dead do not rest and that something hungry waits in the dark. So are vampires real? Well, for any of you out there who have followed my exploits for any appreciable amount of time, you know that my answer is yes, because I have encountered such a creature. But more than that, if you're asking whether belief in vampires changed history, ruined lives, and shaped entire communities, the answer is also an undeniable yes. The idea of the vampire was so powerful, so terrifying, that it compelled people to dig up graves, desecrate corpses, and perform grotesque rituals out of sheer desperation. For me, as a paranormal investigator, vampires are a perfect example of how myth and reality blur. These creatures do exist. But of course, there are purely folkloric elements that reveal something real about us, our fears, our obsessions, and our need to explain the unexplainable. On July 19, 1972, a 20-man search party was organized in the small town of Louisiana, Missouri, to track down a huge, black, hairy beast that was being reported by local residents. Louisiana's police chief Shelby Ward was afraid that nervous residents would start shooting the monster and hit a local by mistake. The media whipped up the frenzy about the monster, and the quiet, unassuming community was launched into the national spotlight. The press humorously dubbed the reportedly foul-smelling creature Momo, which stood for the Missouri Monster. But local residents found the frightening encounters anything but funny. The Missouri Monster Scare actually began on July 11, 1972. The first encounter with the creature occurred on the outskirts of Louisiana, at the base of Marzolf Hill. An 8-year-old boy named Terry Harrison and his brother Wiley, age 5, were playing with their dog in the woods at the edge of their yard. Suddenly, an older sister, Doris, 15, who was inside of the house, heard them screaming. She ran to look out of the bathroom window and saw something standing by a tree. It was 6 or 7 feet tall, black and hairy, she said. It stood like a man, but it didn't look like one to me. She began crying and ran into the other room to call her mother on the telephone. Both Doris and Terry got a good look at the monster and agreed that its face could not be seen because of the mass of hair that covered its body. The creature seemed to have no neck, and it was flecked with blood, likely from the dead dog that it was carrying under its arm. The smell of the creature was said to have been horrendous, and it may have been this odor that made the Harrison's dog violently sick a short time after the incident. The dog's eyes grew red, and it vomited for hours afterward. At 4 p.m., Edgar Harrison, the children's father, and a deacon in the local Pentecostal church returned home from his job at the town waterworks. He found no monster, but he did find that the brush was beaten down where the children said that the creature had been standing. He also found a few faint footprints in the dust and a few black hairs scattered about. That same afternoon, a woman who lived about 3 blocks away from the Harrisons, Mrs. Clarence Lee, reported that she heard animal sounds outside her home. Not long afterwards, she allegedly spoke with a local farmer whose dog had disappeared. Remembering the Harrisons' children's report, she wondered if the monster had taken it. On July 14th, Edgar Harrison was conducting a regular prayer meeting at his home, and soon after it ended, heard clanging sounds like someone was throwing rocks into the metal water reservoir on the top of Marzolf Hill. The reservoir was an attraction for neighborhood children, but it was unlikely that any of them would have been playing there at that hour. As he listened closely to the sounds, he heard one especially loud ring and then an animal-like growl. The sound came closer and closer and was so loud that his family came running out of the house. They urged him to leave the neighborhood, but Harrison wanted to see what was making the sound. Finally, he agreed to leave, and as he drove down Allen Street, he met about 40 people, some of them carrying guns, who were on their way to investigate the sounds at the reservoir. For some reason, Harrison shouted, "Here it comes!" and the entire crowd turned away and ran. A number of people reported hearing the strange cries and screams that night, but by the time the police officers Jerry Floyd and John Whitaker arrived on the scene to investigate, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The creature continued to be seen in the days that followed, leading to Chief Ward's, quote, monster hunt on July 19th. The posse included Edgar Harrison and State Conservation Officer Gus Artis, and they covered Marzolf Hill and the surrounding area using two-way radios, but found nothing. While it was taking place, residents reported animal sounds in other parts of town. On July 20th, more investigators joined the search and again combed the area behind the Harrison house, and all along Marzoff Hill. They found trampled brush, signs of digging, and large tracks that were more than 10 inches long. Handprints were found pressed into the dry, hard soil, which investigators were convinced it would have taken immense pressure to make. They also smelled the beast, believing that it was close, but saw nothing. On July 21st, the monster was seen again, this time on the Great River Road, which runs along the Mississippi River. Ellis Minor, who lived on the road, was sitting in front of his home late in the evening. It was very dark, and suddenly his bird dog began to growl. Minor switched on a powerful flashlight that he used for hunting, and he spotted the monster about 20 feet away from him, standing in the middle of the road. He later told reporters that it had hair as black as coal, and that he could not see its face because the hair on its head hung down to its chest. As soon as I threw the light on it, he recalled, it whirled and took off that way. He did not report the sighting to the police, but he did call Gus Artis, the local conservation officer. By now, national publicity was turning Louisiana into a three-ring circus. People were driving in from surrounding states, hoping to get a look at the creature. Edgar Harrison had become obsessed with finding a solution to the monster mystery. His family refused to come home again, taking up residence in a restaurant the family owned, and so his house was turned into a monster outpost. The phones rang constantly. Meanwhile, Harrison had taken a leave of absence from his job at the waterworks to hunt the monster full time. In the company of friends and investigators, he camped out at the foot of Marzoff Hill for 21 straight nights. And while he never saw the monster, he did hear and smell it, and noted that whenever the searchers were onto something, they were overwhelmed by the terrible smell. During the last week of July and into the early days of August, more prints were found south of town. More tracks were discovered on the early morning of August 3rd at the farm of Mr. and Mrs. Bill Sutterth, who lived just northwest of town. In the middle of the night, they heard high-pitched howling in their yard and ran outside with flashlights to see what was going on. In the middle of their garden, they found 4 large prints. Sutterth quickly called his hunting buddy, Clyde Penrod, who drove over and made a plaster cast of the print. Penrod, who was an avid outdoorsman, was puzzled by the whole affair. With the tracks being 20 feet away from anything else, he couldn't understand how they could have been made. They began abruptly in the center of the garden and ended just as mysteriously. It looked as if the creature had just appeared in the center of the garden and then vanished. No tracks were found anywhere else on the property, and there was no sign that any prankster could have made them either. This was to be the last encounter with the creature, and perhaps it is fitting that the monster flap ended on such an inexplicable note. The discovery of the strange tracks at the Sutterth farm ended the Momo sightings and encounters in Louisiana, and the story has become little more than a remembered curiosity in the area today. There are some, though, who are likely to never forget the summer of 1972. For those people, and for those with an interest in the unexplained, those days in July will always remain a mystery. The Kelly-Hopkinsville incident took place on August 21st, 1955, at the farmhouse of the Sutton family located between Kelly and Hopkinsville, Kentucky. That night, Elmer Lucky Sutton and John Charlie, J.C. Sutton, were hosting guests along with their wives and children. With a total of 8 adults and 3 children in the house, attention was easily divided between different conversations, paying no attention to family friend Billy Ray Taylor as he left the house to fetch drinking water from the well. Taylor described seeing a stereotypical flying saucer streak across the sky as he retrieved the water from the well before the UFO landed a little over half a mile away from the house. He recounted the story to the rest of the house upon returning, but was met with laughter and ridicule from his friends. The incident was shrugged off as an overreaction by Taylor, and the occupants returned to their game of cards and chatting. A little over an hour later, the Suttons' dog began to bark frantically outside, rousing Lucky and Billy Ray to investigate. Walking outside towards the dog's location, the dog quickly sprinted past them as motion began stirring in the nearby trees surrounding the farmhouse. Unable to identify the emerging figures at first, Lucky and Billy Ray ran back to the house and quickly armed themselves before returning to the scene, prepared to fend off the homestead from thieves or wild animals. Retrieving a pistol and a shotgun, the two men returned outside to confront the figures as the rest of the house watched in disbelief. As the men stepped out onto the porch, they finally saw what had emerged from the forest. Little gray men. No taller than 2 or 3 feet in stature, these humanoid-like figures slinked towards the men, their grossly thin, overly long limbs dragging and swaying as they approached. Their glowing yellow eyes seemed almost glazed over, paying no attention to the men through the vision as their bulbous heads bobbled under their own weight. Taylor also described the figures as having bat-like ears that pointed instantly in the direction of any sound that was being made in its vicinity. Without hesitation, Lucky Sutton shot the humanoid at point-blank range with his shotgun. As the shot collided with the figure, a metallic pink was heard and the figure was knocked down to the ground before abruptly standing right back up and running off with the other figures. A few minutes passed after the men retreated into the house, the occupants obviously shaken. Over the course of the next 30 minutes, these figures would reappear and disappear, peering in through windows and scratching their claws against the panes of glass as if purposely intimidating the lodgers. Firing a reaction shot at one of the appearing figures, Lucky and Taylor once again ran outside to see if they had done any damage to the creature, this time only to be ambushed by one of the creatures standing on the overhang of the roof above the porch. The creature grabbed Billy Ray Taylor by the top of the head before he was pulled back inside by his wife, June. Following this surprise attack, the men spent the next 4 hours fending off 15 of these figures as they stalked on the house, peering into the doorway and windows, looking for an opportunity to get inside. After managing to hold them off with gunfire, the family went to the Hopkinsville police station once day arrived, informing the police of the siege they had just underwent. Known as trustworthy folk, the police had no reason to hold any disbelief toward the Suttons, especially since the adults were sober and the children had recounted the same story. Upon investigation of the Sutton farmhouse, there was little evidence of any creature presence aside from a strange patch of glowing soil, but there was certainly evidence of gunfire as there were holes present in nearby trees, windows, and doors. The encounter of the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins was the start of the quote little green men boom in the United States, with the phrase being picked up and used by news outlets and media to describe the encounter and ones that were similar. This, however, is in spite of the fact that the creatures were described as gray-skinned with hues of green rather than being a flat green color. Despite similar encounters being described from that point forward in Hopkinsville and the rest of the United States, there remains a large number of skeptics that all fall back on the same common theory. It was well known at the time that an aggressive family of great horned owls resided in the forest near the Sutton residence, leading many to claim that the family simply mistook the identity of the owls as strange goblin creatures. Skeptic Joe Nickel points toward this fact and states that the residents of the house were more than likely inebriated, regardless of the notion that Lucky's wife, Glennie Langford, was highly religious and didn't allow alcohol inside or near the house, or that the children corroborated the story. That being said, the owl explanation seems dubious. It is highly unlikely that great horned owls would be mistaken for the bizarre goblin-like creatures described. Moreover, no matter how aggressive large owls might be, once the shooting started, they would have almost certainly flown away and not returned. Using large birds as the explanation for encounters with strange creatures has become old hat, and frankly is little more than a dismissive trope. In my estimation, there is no observable evidence of a hoax. Interestingly, there are similar reports in the United States of creatures like the Hopkinsville goblins, though not associated with UFO sightings. Dover, Massachusetts is home to the alleged Dover Demon, a small gray humanoid creature with a large bulbous head and elongated thin limbs that allow it to quickly climb trees. We covered that topic in a previous show. The Chippewa Cree and the Ojibwa indigenous people of Montana share a similar story about a race of small troublemakers known as the Manigishi or the Mimigwisi. Of course, with such a fascinating story, it's gained a large foothold in popular culture. Geraldine Sutton Stith, Elmer Sutton's daughter, wrote a book describing what her father and family experienced and frequently goes on tour discussing the event with ufologists and fans. Media and games have embraced the story too, with many creatures taking inspiration from the tale, such as the Pokemon Sableye and the diminutive creatures from the film Critters. The Kelly Hopkinsville event may never be fully explained, as most of the family and friends present that night have passed away. Nevertheless, this strange tale of flying saucers and alien interlopers lives on. A very peculiar series of events began in February of 1972, when an 11-year-old boy, Colin Robson, and his younger brother Leslie were weeding their parents' garden at their home in Hexham, Northumberland, England, when they unearthed two carved stone heads. Both heads were roughly a little smaller than tennis balls and very heavy. They were crudely carved and weathered-looking, one resembling a skull-like masculine head and the other a slightly smaller female head. The female head supposedly resembled a witch. The heads were cut with hollow eyes and mouth, and a rough protrusion as a nose. Shortly after the boys had taken their heads into their house, a number of peculiar incidents began to occur. The heads would turn around and around all by themselves, and household objects were found inexplicably broken. At one point, one of the daughters of the family living in the house found her bed showered with glass. However, it was the next-door neighbors who experienced the most startling occurrence. A few nights after the discovery of the heads, a mother living in the neighborhood was sitting up late with her daughter who was suffering from a toothache. She and her daughter saw what they described as a half-man, half-beast enter the room. They both screamed, and the husband came running from another room to see what all the commotion was about. By this stage, however, the beast had walked off down the stairs. It could reportedly be heard padding down the stairs as if on its hind legs. The front door was found open, so it was presumed that the creature had left the house that way. Soon after this incident, a doctor who had studied the Celtic culture and had written several books on it took possession of the stone heads to study them. She had several other heads that were similar, and she was certain that the Hexham heads were Celtic and around 1800 years old. The doctor lived in Southampton, about 150 miles from Hexham, and had heard nothing of the strange goings-on encountered by the previous owners of the heads. She put the two stone heads with the rest of her collection. A few nights later, she too encountered the mysterious creature. She woke from sleep feeling cold and frightened. She looked up and saw standing in front of the door of the room a horrid creature that was half-man, half-animal-type beast. Her description of the event runs as follows. It was about 6 feet high, slightly stooping, and it was black against the white door, and it was half-animal and half-man. The upper part, I would have said, was a wolf, and the lower part was human, and it was covered with a kind of black or very dark fur. Suddenly the creature disappeared, and something made me run after it, a thing I wouldn't normally have done. I felt compelled to run after it. I got out of the bed, and I ran, and I could hear it going down the stairs, and then it disappeared towards the back of the house. After this, the doctor and her family saw what they described as a huge black creature like a werewolf appear a number of times around the house. It particularly appeared a lot on the stairs, where it would always run halfway down the stairs and then jump over the banisters to land in the hall, where it would then run off on padded feet. Sometimes it could be heard padding around, although it couldn't be seen, and sometimes doors would fly open, seemingly for no reason. The doctor stated further that there was an evil presence about the house. Eventually, she decided that the stone heads were the source of the problem and got rid of the whole collection. The 2 Hexam heads passed into the hands of other collectors who experienced no werewolf phenomena. However, some did report that a sense of evil seemed to be emitted by the witch-like head, which made them very uncomfortable. Eventually, the heads became untraceable, and their current whereabouts is unknown. One of the strange additions to the mystery was the claim by the previous owner of the house in Hexam where the heads were discovered that he had in fact made the heads as toys for children in 1956 and that they'd been lost in the garden. According to him, the heads were not Celtic at all, but only around 20 years old when they were found. Apparently, there were a series of tests done on the heads, including examinations at Southampton and Newcastle universities, all of which resulted in a flurry of contradictory explanations, theories, and conjecture. Of course, no one should be surprised that the heads subsequently disappeared and have never been seen again. Therefore, as is so often the case with such things, we are left yet again with another mystery. The term swamp monster conjures up different images in different people. Thoughts would range from the skunk ape said to roam the Florida Everglades to the reptilian lizard man that allegedly haunts the swamps of Lee County, South Carolina. Still others, without a doubt, think of the terrifying images of the Sasquatch-like creature dubbed the Fouke Monster that terrified so many back in the 1970s, when the legend of Boggy Creek made its debut on the big screen. But for me, and perhaps even a few of you, the first thing that comes to mind is the fictional Paramount Fae that was featured in an episode of the 1970 series Kolchak, the Night Stalker. The Paramount Fae was, according to the episode entitled The Spanish Moss Murders, a legendary swamp monster that was humanoid in shape, but much larger and more powerful than any person. It was covered in Spanish moss and decaying vegetation. Paramount Fae squeezed the very life out of its victims by enveloping them in a bear hug that crushed their chest cavities. The show portrayed the Paramount Fae as part of Cajun lore, a legendary creature that parents frighten their children with when they fail to behave. The creature was all but invulnerable and could only be killed by a spear fashioned from the wood of a gum tree. The climactic battle between Kolchak, played brilliantly by Darren McGavin, and the swamp monster in the sewers below Chicago, made quite an impression on a then 8-year-old future cryptid enthusiast. I wondered, years after viewing this episode, if Paramount Fae was based on an actual Cajun legend. Over the years, I became quite well acquainted with Cajun culture. I've heard a lot of interesting tales from some old Cajuns. One has to be careful, as these old-timers are notorious yarn spinners and don't mind polishing up a good story just a bit if it helps achieve the desired effect. Even so, I never heard anyone mention Paramount Fae. I've looked often, but have never found anything on this monster that connects it to anything but the old television show. It appears that Paramount Fae was purely the creation of the Kolchak the Night Stalker writing team. Having said that, it's entirely possible that the writers took some well-known Cajun folk tales and weaved elements of them together to yield the ultimate swamp monster that was Paramount Fae. It is those tales that I would like to examine now, here, with you. One of the most prominent figures in Cajun folklore is that of the rougarou. The term is no doubt derived from the original French term loup-garou. Both of these terms are used interchangeably in French Louisiana. I heard the term loup-garou more often, but noticed even as a young boy that when the old-timers told tales of the beast, they used the term rougarou. The rougarou legend has been around for generations and likely migrated south with the French Canadians 200 years ago. The rougarou is, for all intents and purposes, a werewolf. It was described in the past as a beast with the body of a man and the head of a wolf. However, the monster is described most often these days as a shape-shifting human that can transform into a massive wolf-like creature during the full moon. The rougarou is said to inhabit the swamps, marshes, and bayous of Louisiana, and mindlessly slaughters any living thing unfortunate enough to cross its path. The tale, as is the case with most all boogeyman stories, is most often told around campfires and or to encourage obedience in children. One interesting twist on the rougarou legend is that the beast will actually hunt down Catholics who fail to observe the rules of Lent. Some versions of the legend actually claim that one way a person can be cursed to become a rougarou is by breaking the rules of Lent for 7 consecutive years. Now, most would consider the rougarou or loup-garou as just another legend, a myth and nothing more. After all, there is no real physical evidence to support the existence of such a fantastic creature. Or is there? Back in 1996, the DeQuincy News printed a rather unusual story. It tells of a woman named Barbara Mullins who stumbled across something very unusual on the side of a rural Louisiana state highway. Mullins was driving down Louisiana State Highway 12 when she noticed what appeared to be the road-killed carcass of a large animal at the edge of the road's paved surface. She decided to stop and have a look. What she saw amazed her. She described the animal as being roughly equivalent in size to an adult St. Bernard. The beast was covered with a thick, matted coat of reddish-brown hair. What really stood out to Mullins was the overall simian appearance of the animal. This didn't look like any sort of dog that she'd ever seen. The snout was more like what one would see on a baboon than a dog. The ears of the animal were small and pointy, not dog-like at all. The feature that stood out more than any, however, was the very unpaw-like feet of the creature. They were long and elongated, and looked much more like the feet of an ape than those of any canine. Mullins, unlike so many people who've had strange encounters, had a camera in the car and took several intriguing photos. I have to admit that the photos of the DeRitter roadkill, as the carcass became known, are very interesting. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries wasted little time before stating that the animal was nothing more than a Pomeranian dog. Others felt, due to the simian-like features present, that the animal was some sort of primate. Some ventured this was physical evidence proving the existence of none other than the legendary rougarou or loup-garou. Whatever the animal might have been will likely never be known. Even the photos themselves, intriguing as they are frustrating in that there's nothing in them that provides scale and thus verify the claim that the animal was the size of a St. Bernard. Was it just a Pomeranian dog that had gone feral or something more? Is this the real creature behind the tales of the rougarou or the loup-garou? Of all of the swamp monster legends, that of the Honey Island swamp monster might be the most intriguing. The Honey Island swamp is a tract of bottomland lying between the East Pearl and West Pearl rivers in southeast Louisiana. The swamp covers about 250 square miles. Of that, approximately 70,000 acres has been set aside as a protected wildlife area by the Nature Conservancy. The swamp teems with life. Alligators, cougars, coyotes, waterfowl of all kinds, bald eagles, and even the endangered red wolf have all been spotted there. Some claim something else has been seen as well. The first heavily publicized sighting of what will become known as the Honey Island Swamp Monster took place in 1963 when a retired air traffic controller named Harlan Ford claimed to have spotted the creature while fishing the black waters of the Pearl. Ford and a friend named Bill Mills later brought back casting of a very unusual footprint. The footprint was very large and featured 3 webbed and clawed toes. I thought strongly that this print was nothing more than a very large bull alligator, but it isn't this casting that makes me pause and consider the possibility that a monster might actually roam the Honey Island swamp. Rather, it is the words of Harlan Ford and another local named Ted Williams, of course not the baseball player, spoken during several interviews, and a piece of film that make me think that there might be something to the legend. Williams told the television crew of the famous In Search Of series, hosted by the legendary Leonard Nimoy, the following. First time I ever saw it, it was standing plumb still like a stump. I stopped and realized it wasn't a stump and it wasn't supposed to be there. When I stopped, it ran. It was dark gray, about 7 foot high. It jumped a bayou. That was the first time I saw it. The next time I seen him was swimming near the river, the Pearl River. 2 of them. One was bigger than the other and faster than the other, and they swam just like a human, with long overhead strokes. I tried to get one of them to look at me, and the other one ran off, and the other wouldn't look at me at all. I could have shot it, but I wouldn't on account it wouldn't even look at me. It looked too much like a human to me. Broad shoulders, arms hanging down below its knees, and hands. It looked almost like a human. One of the things Williams says during his interview that catches my attention is his description of how the creature stood dead still, like a stump, until it realized it'd been seen. Once it realized it had been spotted, the animal fled. This scenario has been described many times by alleged Sasquatch witnesses. The creature in question is clearly a Sasquatch-like animal. Another intriguing aspect of his second account is of the creature's swimming. There have been a handful of Sasquatch sightings where the witnesses claim to have seen these animals swimming. These reports were often dismissed at the time since it was believed that no apes could swim. This has now been proven wrong. The claim of seeing a wood ape swim would have been deemed too outlandish to be believed back in the early 1970s, even by those who believed in the existence of such creatures. Why would Ford and Williams say something they knew even monster hunters wouldn't believe? Ford is also among the first to mention the possibility that the creature might climb trees to escape detection. I've seen a copy of the Honey Island Swamp Monster DVD, a documentary produced by Harlan's daughter, in which another man recounted a sighting to Ford. In a nutshell, the man said that he saw the beast, and then it just disappeared. The man couldn't believe that the animal could have gotten very far in the time it took him to get to the spot where it had first been seen. And Ford asked him, "Did you look up?" Never forget to look up. It's little tidbits like these that lend credence to the stories of Harlan Ford. After Harlan Ford died in 1980, a reel of Super 8 film was found among his belongings. A segment of the film featured an upright creature walking right to left just inside a tree line somewhere in the swamp. His footage is one of only 3 pieces of video that I've seen that I believe may very well be authentic. Some dismiss the video as a hoax, and I don't. And I have reasons for feeling the way I do. Wouldn't Harlan Ford, assuming he was a hoaxer after fame, money, or attention, have promoted his 8mm film for all it was worth? Wouldn't he have gotten it out there to television producers, newspaper and magazine editors, or even local news stations? Why would he hold on to the footage and show no one, It doesn't make sense. Some might think Ford did have plans for the footage and died before those plans could be brought to fruition. I don't buy it, though. I have no idea why Ford never shared the footage. Maybe he had simply achieved his goal of proving the monster was real. Maybe that was enough for him. As stated previously, the creature described by Ford and others in the Honey Island swamp is clearly a Sasquatch-like animal. It's almost universally said to be close to 7 feet tall, covered in hair, and bipedal. The colors described range from a grayish hue to the more typical reddish brown. To bring this thing full circle, could the legends of the Lugaroo or Rougarou be based on sightings of Sasquatches? The descriptions of the beasts are similar in many ways. Large, upright, covered in hair or fur, etc. Maybe the old Acadians that first settled those bottomlands were projecting their previous knowledge of the French werewolf to the unknown animal they were seeing in the woods near their new homes in the deep south. It is an intriguing theory. Tales of hair-covered, screaming, shambling bipedal swamp monsters aren't going anywhere. Popular culture revels in these sort of things. Bigfoot is used to sell everything from beef jerky to cosmetics. The Swamp Thing of DC Comics and Man Thing of Marvel Comics both play off the swamp monster mythos to sell comic books. Even in Survivor Man, Les Stroud alluded to swamp monsters when he did an episode of his show from the Okefenokee Swamp of southern Georgia several years back. The movie industry will no doubt continue to churn out B-grade films featuring beasts that emerge from the creepy bayous and swamps to terrorize those who dare venture into their territory. Usually scantily clad co-eds, it seems. Quietly, however, among all the noise about these monsters made by popular culture, compelling reports continue to trickle in from normal people who encounter something strange while hunting, camping, fishing, and or hiking in the bottomlands of the South. The père Maffei of Night Stalker fame may have been a figment of some writer's imagination, but real-life swamp monsters might not be. Think about that the next time you venture into the bottomlands, and realize that there are more strange things under heaven and on the earth than we can possibly imagine.